Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Coach Replay Show. I'm your host, Cory Camp, and today I'm excited to have back with us. She's been on our show before talking about some really important things with leadership. She's also been on our What's Up Wednesday show. We've got Allison Rodman with us today to be talking a little bit as we round out the month of October here in 2021, talking about mental health and ways that as leaders, whether we're teacher leaders in the classroom still, or we're removed from the classroom and supporting those in the classroom, how we can support mental wellness. And Allie's bringing in a really great topic, talking about social emotional capacity. We've been talking about SEL in the classrooms with our youngest ones, but Allie brings up some really good points about that social emotional aspect for the adult learners in our building. So, Allie, why don't you take a moment just to introduce yourself to those folks who maybe don't know you just yet, haven't seen one of your episodes with us before, and don't follow you. I'll remind everyone that you can follow Allie if you're interested in following her on Twitter or seeing her website. All of those are on the notes and takeaways. But Allie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks so much, Cory. I am so excited to be joining all of you here again on the show. I am a professional learning designer and facilitator, and my work really digs into how do we support the adult learner from a growth perspective, as well as you mentioned, thinking about building their social emotional capacity. So I work with district and school leaders to try and personalize the learning process for educators across our system, and also work with educators in a variety of different positions to think about how do we know ourselves better and connect as deeply as we possibly can with one another in our learning spaces.
Yeah, and that's where you and we met at a conference, gosh, a couple of years ago, right before everything shut down, I think it was. So it was right at the beginning of 2020. And we were talking about that. It's where we really kind of connected around our passion of, if we're going to make an impact and change things for our students, we have got to start with our adults and look inward and support outward. So this is perfect for this month, talking about the social emotional capacity. And I know you want to start a little bit around educator burnout. So tell us a little bit, what are some of the root causes of educator burnout?
So educators right now, whether you are in the classroom as a teacher, you're a building leader, you're a district leader, even myself as a board member, we are feeling December or January tired here in October, right? And I think
maybe even May tired.
Right. I mean, it just, as I'm working with different schools and walking into classrooms, you can just read it all over everyone's faces. So when we talk about burnout, unfortunately, so many of the solutions that we come up with are quick fixes, right? So, we sort of give one another permission to take that mental health day. But now, perhaps even more so with our substitute shortage, what does that inevitably do, but possibly give our colleagues other, coverages to when on the days that we're out. So there's a hesitancy to do that there. Or we try and have the staff luncheon or give some, treats in the morning to folks as a way to boost morale. But these are all Band-Aid fixes. And when we look at educator burnout, I think we've got to get really honest and intentional about how we're using time and also how we're using spaces within our learning communities. So do our schedules really allow for reflection and recharge? Are there spaces where educators can sort of get away and, calm the noise, so to speak, and find some peace during the course of their day? Or are we just in this constant cycle of busyness where we don't have an opportunity to press pause?
Yeah, I think that's so important. And, last week I had Dr. Kim Ramadan on, and we talked about, supporting and fostering resilience with educators, and a lot along kind of the same lines on, self-care, and how we kind of get this eye roll now when anybody talks about self-care, because it's almost seen as almost like a cop out, like, oh, well, gosh, I see that you're overwhelmed. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you finding time to meditate? And, we're kind of putting it back on the individuals without really, what I love about what you're talking about is really looking at our systems and really thinking about, how are we aligning our days and our time and using that when we do have teachers, so they don't have to call in sick for a mental health day, or they aren't breaking, or at the brink right now, because everybody is, and they have been for a while. And I think the hard thing about this year is it feels a little bit like last year we at least had hope that it's just a year. This year, that hope is really kind of dwindled, and we're just kind of sitting in this kind of pit of despair, and we're all in there together. That doesn't necessarily help things, I think, right? To know that, well, everyone's in it. Well, then that just means, well, everyone's there, and we're not doing really anything about it. So, yeah. So we've talked a little bit about those root causes of educator burnout. Are there any other things as we think about how we're recognizing that? Are there specific things leaders should be looking for when they're doing that?
So I would look very carefully about the time and how it's allocated throughout your master schedule, through your meeting schedules, through your collaboration time. How are we utilizing that resource? Because it is a resource, right? So often we look at budgets and everything kind of has a dollar sign next to it, but minutes are just as valuable, if not, more valuable than some of those dollars within our school system. So how are we, treating them as such and making sure that they're allocated in the right spaces? So if we need time for teacher collaboration and co-planning, is that purposed, appropriate, engage with community members? Are we dedicating time to that? So, the one thing would be really looking at the use of those minutes. And then also, to the degree that it's possible, thinking about our space. And I know this is, possibly even more challenging now as, we're trying to maintain distance in some of our communities. We might be sharing spaces or trying to limit the amount that we're moving, from one space to another. But, is there physical space that we can utilize just to give one another, that breathing room, so to speak, to kind of step away from the busyness, and just kind of clear our heads, because it's a big part of what it means to recover and not just recharge.
Yeah. And you wrote did you co-write this or did you write it yourself? I'm trying to remember, because I know that you team up with some amazing people sometimes. I think this is one that you co-wrote, but you've got a really great article with ASCD on when Netflix isn't enough. And you kind of dive into many of those things that you just mentioned. So I want to just take a quick moment to highlight that. That is in our notes and takeaways. You can get the link to that because it's a really wonderful article. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those things that we can find in that here. But is this kind of what you're talking about when you're talking about aligning purpose and practice? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we often do this at the district level, right? We go in with a district set of goals. We might even come in with a school set of goals that we outline for staff members at the beginning of the school year. I think we miss the mark, or the opportunity, I should say, in two places here. One is at the school level, ensuring our day-to-day actions align to the purpose that we've outlined for both staff members and students. So, for example, if we have set a priority around a particular curricular area or a particular type of staff collaboration, does our day-to-day practice give us a chance to achieve that goal? Or does our day-to-day practice instead get filled with lots of unnecessary emails, paperwork, protocols, and processes that don't necessarily shift the needle a little bit closer to that common measure that we've established together? So that's how it kind of plays out at the school level, I would say. But at the individual level, I think there's a real opportunity here that a number of educators are missing. So when we look at education as compared to other professions, the goal setting process is a little bit more nebulous, right? We might go into a school year and say, these are my student growth objectives, or I want to achieve a certain percentage of growth or achievement at the end of the year state assessment. And those are certainly worthwhile goals. I want to know about you as a professional. I want to know about what your passions are and how you want to continue to grow both professionally and personally. And how are you crafting space in your day-to-day practices to ensure that you're getting just a little bit closer there? So if you're saying, I want to make sure that I have an opportunity to connect with my family or my friends outside of school, how are you structuring your calendar and your schedule to allow for that, so that it's not just this far off thing, but something that you can really value and take a step forward with.
And that's, again, going back to some of those root causes of educator burnout, when they feel like their profession, which our profession is very much, a stamp on who we are as individuals. We are educators. We don't just, teach, we are teachers. So, but when that workload starts to kind of seep into all other areas of our lives, and we don't have that time to spend with family or loved ones or focus on our own passions, that's where we really start to see that burnout, because there's no other outlets. It kind of is all consuming. And especially when that work is really stressful, like it is right now, and we're trying to close gaps and our jobs are very high stakes, it can really start to take a toll. And so I love this idea of challenging our adults to also find purpose and practice in their own individuals. And it doesn't necessarily have to be linked to their students. Mm-hmm. How are you filling your cup with your space and your time, so that way you can re-energize and recover a little bit outside of the school space? So yeah. I think that's really powerful. Yeah.
And we all do this in different ways, Cory, right? Mm-hmm. So, sometimes there are blocks in our calendar that we can't move, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. You can't just go in and sort of move the periods that you're teaching. But when it comes to your prep periods or your meeting times or your planning time, how are you utilizing those in the most focused and intentional ways? And I'll give you an example of that. So often when we step out of a meeting, there's a number of follow-up items that we need to act upon, whether it's an email or a phone call or, whatever the case might be. So rather than sort of kicking that can down the road, so to speak, or like waiting to come back to that later, what if in our calendar, we just like intentionally put in a 15-minute block that was going to be for those administrative tasks, so that we could immediately clear the deck before they even find their way to our task list. I think things like that, and being intentional about how we not only block out, but then also stack some of those things within our calendars, including scheduling recovery time. Like we can't ignore that. It's okay to schedule your breaks. I know it sounds ridiculous, but sometimes for us it doesn't happen unless we put it in there.
Yeah, what gets scheduled gets done, or at least has a better chance of that. I love that you mentioned that kind of 15-minute stacking after meetings. That is something I started doing last year, as some of the tasks and professional learning opportunities that I was engaging and facilitating in started to grow last year with our coaching cohorts and leadership cohorts. I started putting those in 15 before and 15 after, and it's huge. I don't always need all 15. Sometimes other things kind of come in place of that, and I have to move it around. But if I can stick to that, that is huge, just for me to kind of put some closure around that particular piece and then be able to focus on the next part. And I'm not finding that I'm kind of, last minute coming back to things. So that is definitely a huge thing. And I know that again is difficult for some folks. That's not a part of what they do. Some people don't plan out their days in that way. And that might be something that, I, as a coach, I help sometimes my teachers just think about their time. It's not necessarily what are you doing in the classroom or how they're using their time in the classroom. It's helping them think about their time outside of the classroom so they can be more prepared, be more present in that moment with their students. So that's definitely an area that we can support as leaders. So I want to kind of shift back from the individual piece to this idea of the kind of the whole school, or even the whole community aspect of things, thinking about how we can foster that care. So again, moving from this idea of, well, take care of yourself, self-care, to, I love how you call it community care. So tell us a little bit more about this idea and what it takes to make that shift.
So, Cory, you mentioned in the beginning, so often that notion of self-care gets put back on the individual who's struggling, right? To say, well, if you just made that time for yoga, or if you just kind of, went to bed earlier, or meal planned at the beginning of the week, and like,
are you eating healthy?
Made all your meals, or, let me tell you about this water bottle that I have, right? Like, so, but again, it puts sort of the weight of the work on the individual who needs support, instead of revisiting what are our norms as a team,
Mm-hmm.
as a school, as a district, and as a community to say, this is just how we operate here, right? So, instead of, doing like the quick sugar snacks in staff meetings and things like that, like, can we shift that so that it becomes, more healthy offerings? Is it acceptable for staff members to utilize, some of their collaboration time for things such as mindfulness or yoga or stretching, recognizing that taking care of, some of their psychological needs are equally important to those of, their academic responsibilities in the classroom. What's been interesting to me as I go through, all different sources of research related to social emotional learning is when we look at schools who have been engaged in this work for over a decade, right? Like deep sustained work, not just the real, quick hit lesson or program. And they were asked, these districts and schools were asked to share their takeaways. One of the things that comes up time and time again is they share, we wish we would have started with the adults first. And I think it's so indicative of our profession, right? In everything that we do, we always put students first. And that's incredibly important. But as we're looking to the educators across our systems to be the models for our students, we also have to think about what some of these norms are within the communities that we serve and how we're establishing, ourselves as models for kids. So do they see us eating healthy? Do they see us, shutting down the laptop at a certain time? Or are they getting grades back or responses to emails at, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night? We've got to model that social emotional wellness, not just in our face-to-face time with students and families in the classroom, but also sort of in that in-between time as well.
And that is so important. And I can think of a few examples. One here in my kiddo's hometown district last year, one of the principals and then the superintendent did it for the whole district, emailed and said, families, just so you know, we want to make sure that our teachers are being taken care of and that they're finding time to recharge. So if you email a teacher and they're not able to respond to you that day, they're not going to be emailing you after school hours. So they'll get back to you, the next day. Kind of like, don't expect a within the same school day response just because our teachers are taking on so much. And that was actually really well received from the parents in our district. And then our superintendent kind of went out and said, that's also the norm for the rest of the district. And it really did. And I was working with some of the teachers at the time. They were like, oh, that would just like really took a load off of me to not think that, oh my gosh, I've got to respond to that email. I've got to answer that question for that parent. Like, it's okay for me to set down my work for a hot second and have a meal with my family, or just, sit on the couch and Netflix for a few hours before I go to bed. And I think that's really powerful. That's a great example. And I know that same example about just responding to emails, and this is kind of how we do it now, has happened in other districts around the country as well. And just the small things like that, where we're kind of speaking up for our teachers and adjusting some of those norms, because again, I don't think teaching has ever been seen as a 9-to-5 job. My son was saying just the other day in the car, I wish you were still a teacher. Maybe you would work less. And I was like, oh, honey, I worked a lot more when I was a teacher than I do now. It's a harder job. I said, there's so much that you don't see to make all of the, those magical lessons. And because he's got some amazing teachers who truly are magic in the classroom this year. It happened. Like, that doesn't just happen with no preparation and no planning. It takes a lot of work. So, so I think that's really powerful. And again, I have to just bring people back to the article that we have on the notes and takeaways, because there are all of those examples that you've kind of mentioned are in there. Good guiding questions in that resource. It's a great one for sure. So yeah, I love this idea of community care and not just, you could do more if you were taking care of yourself. Have you made time for that? So,
and Cory, with that, I would say, some of that work is as much filtering as it is adding on, right? So anytime I'm working with leaders and they're looking to take steps forward with a particular initiative, strategy, item, my questioning always goes to, well, what are you taking off?
Yes.
And I think that's true in our work as teammates and as parents and, as students, to think through, if I'm adding this thing, or if I'm asking someone to try and put this in their schedule, where am I also coaching them to take something out, to reevaluate what no longer has the highest priority, what no longer has, the greatest leverage point that I can let go of, and give one another permission to do that. Our educators are more accessible than ever, which is fantastic, but also really dangerous, because now we're not only communicating through phone and email and Zoom, but also, a variety of different apps and texting programs. And we have to set filters for ourselves, or else, we are going to find one another in that place of burnout, and it's going to be really hard to dig back out.
Yeah, definitely. I think, what are you taking off the plate? And then, where are you making this space? That's usually the question I ask, which kind of leads to, do you have to take something off of that plate to make space for this thing? Because, you and I have been in professional learning for a while, and we will work with educators who are really excited, but then quickly get disheartened because they're like, it'd be really nice if I had time for this. Like there's no additional, like, I want to do this. I want to put in the effort, but not necessarily at the risk of my own livelihood or my time with family. Like, there's not much more that they have to give. So it really is on the systems to make some shifts for those things that they prioritize too.
Yeah,
easier said than done. I know that for sure. There are so many priorities in our schools. So
yeah.
Well, anything else for our audience around this idea of building that social emotional capacity within our teachers, especially this year as we move forward through this year and years to come? Anything else for our audience?
The only parting words I would share, Cory, is just take care of one another, right? And that's, like you said, easier said than done, but sort of move away from kind of the cheap, like $5 charger, and instead, give each other kind of the nice high-end one that does the super fast charge, but that actually holds a charge, because we need our educators in it for the long game. We can't, just kind of give them those short bursts, because we're not going to make it to the end. As you said, we're feeling, December or May tired already. So we need to take care of one another the best that we possibly can at all levels of the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. All right, Allie. Well, I know we'll have you back on the show again, hopefully sometime this season, if not for sure next season. It's always great to get to catch up with you and talk a little shop and passionate educator learning and support. So I always love having you on the show. Thanks again for joining us.
Same, Cory. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
Of course. Be sure to download the notes and takeaways. Again, if you've signed up for those to be sent directly to you from Sibme, you'll get the recording and the notes and takeaways sent right to your inbox. That's huge. For others, you can also go to learn.sibme.com to download those. Be sure to follow us, and be sure to follow Allie. I follow her on Twitter and with the Learning Loop, and so many great things that you put out through the Learning Loop. So thanks again.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everyone.